Well, I'm glad you're here today as we're kicking off this new series. Aren't you glad you're here? Fantastic. Me too. Hey, public service announcement, 60 days until Christmas. Who's excited about that? Yeah. Yeah. Some of you are excited. Some of you are like, hey, we haven't even had Halloween or Thanksgiving yet. Slow your roll. All right. I get it. But I just say, let's jump to Christmas and knock this year out. Okay. Let's get it done. Some of you have already started Christmas lists several years ago. Christmas lists are somewhat new to me. It's just not something that I did a lot growing up, but when I got married, that's part of the thing. So my wife was like, you got to have a Christmas list. So I put together a Christmas list, and at the top of my Christmas list was a remote control truck. And she was like, really? I'm like, yeah, they're awesome. All right. And she was like, are you? I'm like, yeah, seriously. So I get to Christmas, and I open this remote control truck. And I was so excited. I pulled it out of the box. I knew that you had to charge the battery for a long time before you could use it. So I stopped what we were doing. I ran to the other room. I plugged in the battery and went back, set my watch for 8 hours. And so that as soon as it went off, I could go and hang out with my truck, right? And so we're playing games as a family later that afternoon, later that evening, and the alarm went off. And I got up, stopped whatever we were doing, got the battery, ran outside, plugged it into the truck, and the much anticipated moment came, and I hit go, and it barely crawled down the gravel drive, okay? To say I was disappointed would be an understatement, okay? Here I am. It totally didn't match my expectations. I had visions of ramps and crawling over limbs and dragging stuff, right? I had visions of the way it would go, and it didn't quite pan out. Isn't that the way sometimes we feel about our faith with Jesus, though? That we have moments where we look up and we go, man, this isn't exactly what I expected it would be. Like this is tougher than I thought it was going to be. And maybe for some of us, we look and go, I thought it was going to change my life. But if I'm honest, my life is not really much different than when I began. And I want to suggest this today and in this series is that maybe the problem isn't with God's promise, but maybe it's that we've barely scratched the surface of what it means to fully follow Jesus. And in this series, what I want us to do is look at what lies beneath the surface of what it means to be a Christian, what lies beneath the surface of what it means to follow Jesus, and how we can experience the full and satisfying life that we are after. This series is based on a passage out of 2 Timothy 1, verse 7, where a guy named Paul is giving some advice to a young man named Timothy. Now, we know a lot about Paul. He hated Christians, was a persecutor of Christians, tried to wipe them out. Then he had a very personal experience with Jesus that forever changed his life, and God used him to start many churches, and he wrote letters to the churches and to people telling them how to live out their faith. And there was this young man named Timothy that he took in as his protege, who was merely a teenager when he took him in. We know that in 1 Timothy 4:12, it's a verse that we use a lot when we're talking to students and children about their faith. It says, let no one look down on you because you are young, but rather in speech, conduct, love, faith, and purity. Show yourself an example to those who believe. He says, hey, look, Timothy, use your faith to minister to people. And so that's happening in his first letter. And then in his second letter, he writes this. In the very beginning, he says some things that would suggest that Timothy's faith had fizzled just a little bit. That there was something that had come up in Timothy's faith. And he says, man, you were doing so great once, and I want to remind you of that. So we're going to look at 2 Timothy 1:7 today and in this series, but I want us to read it in context. So let's start with verse 5. He says, I remember your genuine faith, for you share that faith that first filled your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. And I know that same faith continues strong in you. He says your genuine faith, first of all. When he says, I know you, he says, I saw your faith. And I remember, I want to remind you of how real it was to you back then. And it's the same kind of faith that filled your grandmother and your mother, which is significant because it was a very male-dominated society. But I believe he's mentioning it to encourage us, those of us who are maybe single parents or grandparents who have faith, and maybe it's missing in the generation, but yet their faithfulness to follow God and to serve God impacted generations to come. So don't give up. He says, I remember your genuine faith. It's the same genuine faith that you witnessed in your grandmother, same genuine faith that you witnessed in your mother. He says, I want to remind you of that. And then beyond that, this is why I remind you to fan into flames the spiritual gift that God gave you when I laid my hands on you. He says, fan into flames. Now, here's the thing that I want us to see here is that in the original language, it actually means rekindle the flame. He said, I want to remind you of your faith that you once had and how hot your faith was, how great your fire of faith was. And you know what? It's dwindled a bit. And if we're really honest, we've experienced that too, where we look back when our faith was fresh and we were so on fire for following Jesus and doing something for Jesus. And then life happened. And we look up and we're not quite as burning, quite as bright for Jesus as we once did. He says, I want you to remember how hot that fire once burned, and I want you to do something. I want you to rekindle the fire that once was there. When I was a kid growing up, one of the things I loved is on Friday nights when it was super cold. It's finally cold weather. I love cold weather, all right? I sweat a lot, so cold weather is a blessing to us sweaters, okay? So if you don't like that, sorry. God blesses us too sometimes, okay? So there was, on really cold nights on Friday night, we'd have a fire in the fireplace. And one of the things I loved in the morning, we'd get up and we'd go to the fireplace and we'd blow on it and we'd see the coals, the embers, right, light up. And my dad, a lot of times, if it was going to be cold all day, he would get in there and he'd take the kindling and wood and some paper and he'd relight the fire and he'd get it going. And in the same way, Paul is telling Timothy, hey, it was there and it's not completely gone. So go back to your foundation. Go back to what it once was and let's get that fire going again. Rekindle the flame. And here's how we need to do it. Verse 7, for God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity, but of power, love, and self-discipline. In the next few weeks, we're going to look at what this means. We're going to look at this advice that Paul gives Timothy of what it means to rekindle the fire, what it means to stoke the fire and experience the fullness of what it means to follow Jesus. But this week, we're going to start with this first part. For God has not given us a spirit of fear and timidity. Now, I don't know what had faced Timothy. I don't know what he was going through. I don't know what had happened in his life. But it is the only thing that Paul addresses when he's talking about his faith. So I come to this conclusion of, man, there's some kind of fear that has controlled his life rather than allow faith to dictate the decisions that he makes. The word for fear and timidity here is actually a word for cowardice. Cowardice meaning a lack of strength or ability to do what we know we need to do. See, fear is a barrier to experiencing God's best because it dictates so much of our decisions. We make decisions based on fear all the time. It robs us of the inner strength to do what we know we need to do what we know God wants us to do. And so often our lives are affected and influenced by our greatest fears. I felt that way when God wanted me to be a pastor. I was like, no thanks, God. That's for people who are way smarter than me. And way better behaved. I didn't always have when the conduct grades came in school, mine was not always an E, okay? I'm just going to say that, all right? It was most of the time an N, needs improvement, okay? So I thought, man, this is not the role for a guy like me, Jesus. I had a lot of fears. I had a fear of failure. What if I step out to be a pastor? I know nothing about being a pastor. Those people seem really good, and they seem like they've got their life under control, and that's one thing I know about myself is I don't. The fear of failure, my kids laughing at me because they know. Maybe the fear of being unworthy. Because nobody knows you like you, right? I know my thoughts. I know my actions. I know my struggles. I know my failures better than anyone else. And I thought, God, really? You want me to be? No, God, I've messed up too much. I'm not that good of a guy. You must have gotten my name mixed up with someone else. Maybe it was, for me, is also a little bit of the fear of being poor. See, I saw the way my pastors were, and I thought, no, thanks. There's other things I can do. And guess what, God? I'll go to college, I'll get a really good degree, and I'll do ministry on the side, okay? And then I can actually give to ministry. How about that too, God? I mean, I was trying to negotiate all the things in all the ways, thinking, man, this is going to work out. See, so often our decisions are directed by our fears, and there's a lot of sources of our fear. There's the fear that is fueled by the past experiences, right? It takes one failure to experience failure and go, I never want that to happen again. It's rejection, right? It takes one time feeling rejected and betrayed to go, I'm going to try to make sure I never put myself in a place where that happens again. It's past moments where you felt like there was you lacked control, that other people were in control, that feeling of feeling powerless. And you thought, I'm going to do everything in my power to not allow that to happen again. See, self-preservation is not a bad thing, right? But at the same time, so often self-preservation causes fear to become the one calling the shots in our lives. See, we have these fear that control our lives. And I know for me, a lot of times I would think, man, I'm not afraid of anything. I've got this. I'm not afraid. And then I realized that one of my greatest fears was the fear of vulnerability. Being honest and open with people, because I'd put myself out there before and other people had hurt me and they'd use my who I was against me. And I thought, you know what? I can prevent that. I just won't let anyone in again. The problem is that's a very lonely place to be. And it'll cause you to miss genuine community. See, there's other sources of fear. Fear of uncertainty, right? It's the fear of uncertainty so often that fuels our fear. This future uncertainty. We want to try to control our outcomes, right? We're bootstraps kind of people, right? We're going to pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and make it happen. If it's to be, it's up to me. And so in so many areas of our lives, we try to control everything, and it's the fear that is driving that behavior. It's why there are helicopter parents and lawnmower parents, because you have a desired future for your kid, and so you never allow them to experience the consequences of their decisions. It's why it's so exhausting for teachers and parents and administrators. I see teachers and parents and coaches and administrators nodding their heads right now because they've experienced it. Why? The fear that's driving that behavior is the fear that they won't succeed the way you want them to. See, it's also the fear of uncertainty that causes us to hold on to our old life rather than fully follow after Jesus. It causes us to have a surface level faith. Because we go, God, I don't know how it will really work out if I completely give you control. I don't know what I'm going to miss, and I'm afraid of what I'm going to miss out on. So, God, I want to do both. I want to follow you, but I want to hold on to my old life. It's the fear of uncertainty, future uncertainty, that causes us to hold on to old life and miss the fullness of the new life. It's why people get so emotionally charged over elections, the fear of uncertainty, because fear will dictate our emotions and our decisions in the direction of our life. That's why people leverage fear to control, right? Think about our political campaign ads, right? This candidate hates America and will take everything you love. But this candidate, he loves you and he will send you a card at Christmas. Vote for the, right? And both parties are doing it, okay? Both of you went, yeah, I know the candidate who's doing that. And it doesn't matter what side of the political party you're on. Both sides do it. Why? Because they know that fear controls the decisions that we make. There's even science behind it. I found this out this past week from someone way smarter than me. All right, that when we are confronted with fear, our blood rushes from the front of our brain where reason and logic, right, happen, and it rushes to the back where emotion is processed. So when we're faced with our fear, we react to the fear rather than respond in faith. See, fear is the enemy of experiencing who God created us to be. It's the enemy of experiencing what God wants to do in us and through us. Deep down, we're all looking for the full and satisfying life that's out there, and we're finding any way we can to go after that. See, Jesus, when he came in John 10:10, it's recorded him telling us, hey, I have come to give you a full and satisfying life. But too often, fear is the enemy keeping us from God's best. And today, I want us to see this, that faith that eliminates fear will lead us to our desired outcome. See, so often when our faith is confronted by our greatest fear, our faith becomes very feeble. If we're honest, that's what happens in all of us. But good news, we're not the first ones to experience this. See, this has been happening ever since the first followers of Jesus and his disciples experienced this. And a guy named Matthew, who's one of Jesus' closest followers, records a moment when the disciples' faith was confronted by fear, and their fear and their lack of faith was exposed. And I want us to look for the next few minutes at that story in Matthew chapter 8. It says this: Then Jesus got into the boat and started across the lake with his disciples. Now, just before this, he's healed a bunch of people. There's crowds following. They love what Jesus is doing, love hearing him teach. And so Jesus, right before they get in the boat, he says, hey, I just want you to know, it's not always going to be fun to follow me. It's not always going to be comfortable to follow me. It's not always going to be safe to follow me. I just want you to know it's not exactly what everybody thinks it is. It's the warning that so many of us like to ignore, that we don't take to heart, and they didn't either. So Jesus puts them in a boat, says, let me give you an object lesson of what I mean. So they get in a boat, and it says, suddenly a fierce storm struck the lake with waves breaking into the boat. In life, that's how storms hit us, right? Suddenly. We didn't see it coming. We didn't plan for it. We didn't know it was going to happen. We weren't prepared, right? When we get that call we didn't expect, or the news that we didn't see coming, we go into work thinking we have a great job, and we leave that day without one, right? We go into the doctor's appointment expecting just a routine checkup, and you leave with anything but routine news, right? We have that child who was once so compliant, and they begin making these series of decisions, and suddenly the waves of emotions are breaking into what seemed so normal and comfortable. They begin to overwhelm you. See, these disciples had experienced boat life before. A couple of them were fishermen. This is not the first storm they'd ever faced. So imagine when the storm began to rise up, they start going to we know what to do. You go there and you go there, and we're going to start doing this. We're going to get to, and they had a plan. And they began working with all they had, but it didn't work out like it had before. And the boat begins being consumed. And they're working and fighting for their life. And they look over to see what Jesus thinks. And check this out. But Jesus was sleeping. Here the disciples are fighting for their lives, and Jesus is taking a nap, right? If we're honest, we have felt that way before. That when we feel like we're going through life storms and that things are coming down on us, we wonder, where is God? Like I'm stressed out, I'm worn out, I'm freaked out, and Jesus, are you sleeping on me? He goes on. The disciples went and woke him up shouting, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. Actually, a better translation, we're going to die. The disciples went and woke Jesus up. When they'd done all that they could do and they couldn't rescue themselves, they finally went to Jesus. Don't we do that too? We wait till we get to the end of ourselves and the end of our ability, and then we finally turn to God and say, God, help us, we're going to die. They didn't go and say, Jesus, we want to make you aware of a rising situation that we think you should know about, right? No, they go, wake up, save us, we're going to die. And look how he responds. Jesus responded, what are you afraid of? Don't you know that sometimes being a disciple is frustrating? Well, Jesus, let's see. Wind, waves, storm, death. That's a pretty good start, all right? And Jesus is over there going, man, don't you love the sound of rain? Let's just take naps, right? Jesus is going, look, I'm not worried about it. Why are you? What are you afraid of? Your lack of control? The uncertainty of how this will turn out? And then he says this, you have so little faith. Let me answer that question for you. Here's why you're afraid. Because you have so little faith. Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and suddenly there was a great calm. They did everything that they could, and nothing worked out. And in that moment, Jesus said this, look, fear reveals a lack of faith. Fear, the fear that controls us reveals a lack of faith. Their faith, he's probably looking at him going, your faith was in your boating ability. How'd that work out for you? Your faith was in the boat, all right? And the boat itself, because it was comfortable, it felt like it was safe, and then all of a sudden it started coming apart, and it didn't hold up for you. Your faith was just in the simple fact that you obeyed me and got into the boat and you followed me and you thought, as long as I follow Jesus, everything will work out. I'll never go through any storms. See, our faith placed in the wrong thing will always fail us. But don't you know, they're going, but Jesus, we followed you. We got here. Why are we going to die out here? Why are we going through this storm? I've asked that question before. Like when ministry wasn't going the way I thought it should. And I remember going, God, I just want to remind you, I didn't sign up for this. You told me I was supposed to do this. Like, you're supposed to take care of me now. Like when my wife and I struggled to get pregnant, and I remember going to God and going, God, we're the good guys, okay? Remember? Like, we're on your team, and you're supposed to be helping us with this. When my wife and I lost a child, I remember having that same kind of conversation because I was in the middle of camp season as a student pastor and going, God, I'm giving everything I've got. I'm missing my family, and this is what I get for it. Come on, God, where are you in this? See, in the midst of the storm, so often we go, why, God, why am I going through this? And that fear begins to control the way we respond. The reality is that fear is a product of being confronted by our lack of control. We like control. We want to control the outcome and control the future. And when it comes down to it, when it comes down to faith, he wants us to trust him with the future, whatever that might be. Unfortunately, so many of us treat faith as simply a means to try to control God. God will follow you if you'll do this, and as long as you do this for us. But fear reveals a lack of faith because it shows us where we don't trust God. Goes on and says this. The disciples were amazed. Who is this man? They asked. Even the winds and the waves obey him. Isn't that interesting? They trusted Jesus enough to get in the boat with him. But in the midst of the storm, they weren't sure they could trust him anymore. And they go, who is this man? It's hard to trust someone you don't really know. See, many times we treat faith like a religion. Religion is something we can control, and it's formal, and it's all about human effort. Yet a relationship with God, what he invites us into, it is personal, and it comes only through faith, trusting him. See, when we do get to a place where we know God, we'll begin to realize that we have no need to fear the storm because we know the one who's greater than the storm. Jesus wanted them to have the kind of faith that would eliminate fear. When I moved to Odessa, one of the first things I did with that student ministry was go on a mission trip. I mean, less than a month there, and I'm going on a mission trip to Guatemala with a group of students. We get on this little bitty plane, like one of those kind of planes that's like a straw with wings, like whoop, like the 5'5" flight attendants are ducking to go down the aisle. Yeah, and I crawled to my seat, right? And so get there, it's tight, it's squeezed. There's 2 seats on my side, 1 seat on this side, and to say it was an aisle would be generous. There was a space between us, okay? And so we get on the flight, and this one guy, I can tell he's nervous and anxious, and I find out later he's 19 years old, young man, sits right here behind us. And the minute the plane begins to back away from the gate, he goes, "Oh my gosh, are we in the air?" I'm like, "Dude, we're going backwards. Do you know how a plane works?" Like, I didn't say that out loud. That's what I thought, okay? So I began to embark on the longest 50-minute flight from Odessa to Houston I've ever been on in my life. As we taxied around to take off, as the plane accelerated, so did his voice as he went, "Ah!" As we got all the way up into the air. And this really big, large man with our group says from the front of the group, because he thinks that it's me and the other student pastor being goofy, he goes, "Oh, suck it up, you sissies." And I'm like, "Oh, great. Jesus loves you, buddy." That God doesn't like you, but Jesus does. We got up in the air, and there was turbulence the whole way there. And the guy was freaking out. And at one point, he's like, "Oh, I can't feel my legs." And he's hyperventilating. I'm like, "It's because you're breathing. You're hyperventilating, buddy." So I started working with him and talking through these breathing exercises. You would have thought it was a pregnancy class. Okay, I'm like, "Breathe in, 1, 2, 3. I mean, it was so funny, actually. So we land, and the dude starts apologizing. He's like, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Now, here's the thing. He had enough faith to buy the ticket. He had enough faith to get on the plane. He had enough faith to trust the pilot, but he didn't have enough faith to enjoy the ride. Many of us have enough faith to get in the boat. Remember, there were plenty of people still on the shore. Plenty of people who didn't truly follow him into the boat. They had enough faith to get into the boat, but they didn't have enough faith to trust him in the midst of the storm. If you want to experience the fullness of hope and joy and peace that comes with following Jesus, if you want to experience the full, satisfying life that he promises, we've got to realize and recognize that one of the greatest enemies to experiencing that is fear. We've got to have the kind of faith that will eliminate fear and that will lead us to our desired future. There's a way that we can begin to develop this kind of fear. First of all, we've got to expose the fear. We've got to expose the fear. What is it you're afraid of? Jesus says, "Why are you afraid? Why do you struggle to trust God's way?" What is the fear that's determining your path over God's path for you? See, defining the fear disarms its power. Most of our fears are rooted in a lie. Lies like, "You don't measure up," and Jesus says, "Well, you're more than enough." The lie says, "You'll always be alone," and Jesus says, "I'll never leave you or forsake you." The fear in the lie says, "You can't," and Jesus says, "I can through you." The lie says, if you don't control it, it's going to be a disaster. And Jesus says, control is only an illusion. I have the whole world in my hands. We've got to expose the fear and expose the lie. And when we do, it will lose its power. And we've got to grow to know God. We got to grow to know God. See, faith isn't about just religious information. It's about a relational invitation. It's an invitation to anyone and everyone who would come to a place where they go, "Look, I know I've failed. I know I've done things my way instead of God's way. And I recognize that has created a gap." And I want you to hear me on this. No one has messed up so bad that God's grace can't save you. And no one is so good that you don't need God's grace. We all have to come to a place, if we want that kind of relationship with God, to grow to know God, where we've got to admit that we've sinned, we've messed up, believe that Jesus Christ died on the cross to pay the penalty of our sin, and he rose from the grave so that we could put our faith in him and trust him with our entire lives. And in doing that, we can have access to know God in a real relational way. You can grow to know God. And if you've never done that, please, before you leave today, let our host know if you're watching online. Let one of us know here, or stop by the hub. Because that's where it starts. You've got to start with the relationship. And then when you have the relationship, you've got to grow to know God on a daily basis. Look, if I only talk to my wife once a month or a couple times a month or even once a week, we wouldn't have a very good relationship. She would not trust the decisions that I make. I wouldn't trust the decisions she makes. If you want to grow to know God in a way you can trust Him, you've got to grow with Him on a daily basis by spending time with Him, talking to Him. That's what prayer is. It's not like some religious behavior. It's talking to God. Spend time with Him, reading His scripture and learning about who He is and His character and who He's made you to be. Spend time with Him by studying and listening to other people talk about His word and teaching. Right? It's as we grow to know God that it begins to eliminate fear. One of His closest followers, John, said that as we grow to know the love of God, it eliminates fear because His perfect love casts out fear. If you need to help knowing how to grow in your faith, how to pray, how to read His word, scripture, anything like that, we want to help you. We're not saying go do that. We can give you resources. Stop by the hub, talk to us, send us an email, let our hosts know online. We want to give you those resources so that when it comes to trusting something, you can choose to trust God. We trust something already, either our own ability or God. Choose to trust God. Choose to trust. It's a daily choice. We don't need to fear the future when we know the one who holds it. Choose to trust God. And when it comes down to it, faith isn't just trusting in what God can do. It's trusting Him even if He doesn't. Fear will erode your faith. And it will lie to you. And as we listen to this song, I want to encourage you to identify your fear and trust God with it today. Because if we're going to experience the full and satisfying life that God promises, we've got to come to a place where we recognize that one of the two will direct the decisions that we make. Our greatest fear or faith in the one that's greater than our fear.
When he told you you're not strong enough to put up a good fight. When he told you you're not worthy. When he told you you're not loved. When he told you you're not beautiful, that you'll never be enough. He's a liar. He will take your breath, stop you in your steps. Fear, he's a liar. He will rob your rest and steal your happiness. So cast your fear in the fire, 'cause fear, he's a liar. When he told you you were trouble, you forever be alone. When he told you you should run away and never find a home. When he told you you were dirty and you should be ashamed. When he told you you could be the one that grace could never change. Oh, fear, he's a liar. He will take your breath and stop you in your steps. So cast your fear in the fire, 'cause fear, he's a liar. Let your fire fall, cast out all my fears. Let your fire fall, your love is all I fear. Oh, let your fire fall, cast out all my fears. Oh, let your fire fall, your love is all I fear. Oh, let your fire fall, cast out all my fears. Oh God, let your fire fall, your love is all I feel. Oh, let your fire fall, cast out all my fears. Oh, let your fire fall, your love is all I feel. Oh, fear, he is a liar. Oh, he will take your breath and stop you in your steps. Fear, he is a liar. Oh, he will rob your rest, steal your happiness. So cast your fear in the fire, 'cause fear, yeah, he's a liar. Yeah, fear, he's a liar.